Welcome to Target Market Insights, the multifamily and marketing podcast. Each week, John Kasman interviews multifamily and marketing experts to teach you how to find the best places to invest, attract investors, and grow your portfolio. You are listening to Target Market Insights with your host, John Kasman.
Welcome to Target Market Insights, the multifamily and marketing show. I'm your host, John Kasman, and I want to thank you for joining us for another great episode. Now, if you are getting great value out of this show, I need you to do me one quick favor and leave us that 5-star rating and review. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. Now, today, we're going to be talking to Jonathan Twombly. Jonathan is president and managing member of Two Bridges Asset Management, LLC. Before founding Two Bridges, he was a partner in the real estate investment firm, TRB Investment Group. He began his career as a lawyer and spent over a decade practicing in American Lawyer top 100 firms, and where he focused on real estate and hospitality matters. Let's welcome to the show, Jonathan Twombly.
Hey, thanks for having me today.
Jonathan, thank you for coming on the show. I went over your bio at a very high level. Why don't you take a minute or two and give us a little bit more background?
Sure. I started out, professionally as a corporate lawyer on Wall Street doing commercial litigation. So basically, I was representing like Fortune 100 companies, fighting with other Fortune 100 companies over like billions of dollars, and it didn't really matter who won in the end of the day. And they never went to trial because they always settled. And so I got really tired of that. And in 2011, I became a kind of belated victim of the financial crisis. The work had dried up, pretty substantially. In 2009, I spent a couple of years surfing the internet at my office, learning about real estate investing. And then finally, 2011, they got tired of paying me $300,000 a year to surf the internet, let me go, which was great because I really wanted out. I was really sick of it, really had reached the end of my tether with that career. And when they let me go, I was fortunate enough that I had some savings. So I didn't have to rush into the next thing. And I was really ready not to be a lawyer anymore, and was very interested in real estate. So I started doing a lot of networking, and kind of long story short, that's how I wound up in TRB, which was my first real estate firm. And was off to the races from there.
No, that's awesome. Well, I mean, the fact that you wound up in real estate, not the fact that you got let go and all the other things that led up to it. But
it was one of the greatest things that's happened to me. Getting let go was one of the best things ever, I have to say.
Well, I was going to say, to have that clarity, even at a high level job, right? I mean, you talked about making, $300,000. I think for most people, that's the challenge they face. You've got this high paying job. We're taught to go to college, get a great job, work your career, make great money, and do it until you retire. Here you are, making great money, working a job that most people, would envy, and you were excited or happy when you actually got let go. I mean, can you just explain kind of that feeling and maybe what others were thinking, right? Because I imagine you didn't get that same response from other people in your network that you got let go from this high-paying job.
Yeah, I mean, I'd been unhappy for quite a while and had been looking for some kind of exit and really couldn't figure out what it was. And I definitely had the golden handcuffs problem, right? Where while I had the job, while I was there making that money, and I had a family to support and all that sort of thing, my options in my head were limited to what else could I do that would instantly pay me $300,000, right? And that's very, very limiting when you're thinking that way, because there aren't that many jobs where you can essentially like be a career changer and change right into like the same level of income. But the interesting thing was that as soon as I got laid off and I no longer had the $300,000 job and I was at zero, then suddenly everything became an option, right? And I remember sitting at home as I was kind of trying to figure out what I could do. Whereas weeks before, my thinking was like, there's nothing I can do, or like maybe I can go into management consulting, right? Like, kind of like that was like as broad as I could think. Then, sitting at home a couple of weeks later, and I'd be watching TV, and there was like a commercial that came on there's a school in New York called Apex Technical Institute where they teach you how to fix air conditioners and stuff like that. And it's like, oh, I could do that, right? I mean, it's like suddenly it's like everything now is a possibility. So it's, it was actually great. I mean, and obviously, like I said, I was fortunate. I had when I was a lawyer, I lived really well within my means, so I was saving money and this was actually probably something that worked in my favor too. I remember, and if you're in one of these high paying jobs, you may be familiar with this phenomenon, but I remember that, I was the sole breadwinner for my family. My wife was home with our young children. She wasn't working, and I was saving like half of my after-tax income. And meanwhile, my colleagues who were making the same salary as me, plus they were married to someone else who was making the same salary as them, were complaining about like, I don't have any money. I don't have any money. And I was like, how could you not have any money? Like we're really blessed to be making this much money, and your family's making twice this because of what your spouse does. How could you not have any money? Well, you dig into it, and it's like they both drive an Audi, and all the kids were in private schools, and they had a house out in the Hamptons in addition to the house that they lived in all the time, and they were constantly taking expensive vacations. And it was like, well, of course you're spending like every cent that you get, because you're living this lifestyle. For me, like, we lived in a very small apartment. I didn't want to have a big mortgage, so I had practically zero mortgage. We were living fine and doing everything that we wanted to do on half of my salary. So when I got laid off, I then had the ability to take some time to think about what I wanted to do. I actually had money to then launch the business that I launched. So if you are in one of those high-paying jobs and you're miserable and you're thinking about, hey, I want to get into real estate, the first thing you have to do is get your spending under control so that you can build yourself a nice nest egg that then you can essentially pay yourself in retirement or pay yourself in that interim period when you're starting a business or getting into the next thing.
Yeah, Jonathan, I think that's so powerful because you mentioned the golden handcuffs, and that's something a lot of people struggle with, right? You make good money and you feel like the world needs to know. I'm not saying from a braggadocious standpoint, but just the fact that you've put in all that hard work, we feel like, you've earned it, right? You earned that Audi, you've earned that second house, you earned that vacation. And what ends up happening is you create a lifestyle where you actually look at your bank account and you don't have the savings that you would think you would have based on the income. And I will tell you, I mean, as you told your story, there was a lot of familiar things where we were very similar, where I bought a duplex as our first investment. We lived upstairs, rented out the first floor. I lived there for 8 years. My wife and I both, had pretty high income jobs, even though we're in Chicago. And when I made my transition into real estate full time, it was a similar thing where I was like, okay, I'm going to go from, fairly high salary to decent, I still got income coming in, but not the money I was making. And a lot of the folks that I would talk to, even from an investing standpoint, they couldn't because they were, their spending habits were there. They were living a lavish lifestyle. And as an outsider looking in, you would say, oh man, this person has, everything together, great car, great vacations, like you said, private schools. But, I talked to them about investing and, we'll talk about what we were doing. And a lot of them didn't have the funds set aside to invest. So I thought that was really interesting. What is your experience when you talk to people about, what you do now? We'll talk about that in a moment. But, what was that experience like in talking to other people and trying to make that shift in mindset?
In terms of what exactly? Like my old colleagues or like who?
Yeah, just I mean, people in your network, right? So I mean, and I don't know if this is something you face, but for a lot of people, if you are around people who are, I'll call it spenders, or people who are living a lifestyle and certainly, working in your industry, making good money and, and spending and having those things, it can be a challenge to be a saver and to continue to, to do the things necessary to grow and stay on that saving pathway. So I'm curious if you ever felt any external pressure or even in your conversations with other people, how that may have manifested itself.
I think I was, well, in a way, kind of fortunate because maybe it's just due to the nature of the legal profession itself, but people are so busy that they don't really have that much time to socialize with each other. so I didn't, at least, or maybe other people did, and I just wasn't a part of it. I don't know, but I never really was having those conversations. It was only in that context of hearing people complain that they didn't have any money and not being able to figure out how that could be true. But I never just personally was afflicted with that need to keep up with the Joneses. That was just never my issue, right? I did, let's say, when I was single and um, didn't have to worry about anybody else, and was also unhappy with my job. I definitely spent a lot more money trying to kind of buy myself some pleasure, essentially, right? So I spent a lot of money going out, eating out, things like that, just because I felt like, well, I deserve it because I'm working so hard and I'm not really getting anything out of this other than money, not getting any psychic reward out of this. So I think sometimes people who are in those high paid, high stress, not very satisfying jobs often spend because it's like a compulsive thing. Like they're spending to try to make themselves happy because they're not happy in their work. Like, and the interesting thing is I found that once I quit, or was laid off and went into business for myself, even though my income dropped a lot, I was just so much happier because the thing for me, I'm actually not motivated by money. Money doesn't really, that's probably why it's easy for me to save, because I'm not like looking to acquire stuff. But what for me, time is the issue, right? I'm very sensitive about time, and I hate being told what to do. Like that's probably the thing I hate more than anything in the world, is like somebody telling me, Jonathan, you must spend your time doing this, or you must do this task for me. So liberating myself from that was, totally made the financial sacrifice worthwhile. And so for me, as long as I'm making enough money to live on and have a decent life, like that's enough for me. I'm not really motivated by more. What I'm motivated by is like how far out can I extend my freedom window, right? So that's really for me what I'm working for, is to like develop my various businesses so that they provide me enough runway, hopefully until I can do this until I die, where I don't have to answer to anybody else, and then hopefully leave something for my children so that they have the same freedom, right? So I mean, I'm never gonna have this problem, so it's not something to worry about. Like, but how like Warren Buffett always says, like he wants his children to have enough money to do anything, but not to do nothing, right? And so that's kind of how I feel. I want my children to be left with enough that they have choices and what to do, and they're never doing what I did, being stuck in a job they hate just for money. I want them to be able to do whatever it is that they want because they love it, and not have to be stressed out about money while they're doing what they love. So
I love that, man. Just that quote right there is really strong. Enough money to do anything, but not enough to do nothing. So that happy balance to find purpose and meaningfulness in our lives, I think that's something that a lot of investors look for. And part of the reason people look at real estate investing is for the opportunity to get that time freedom, right? To go from exchanging hours for dollars and start freeing up your time with passive income. But let's talk about that a little bit more. I mean, you've got Two Bridges. I'd love to hear more about launching that company, what exactly you do with Two Bridges and what you're working on right now.
absolutely. So just before I jump into that, just one last point on this, which is that I think one of the things that's so great about real estate, and especially multifamily, is it's extremely time leveraged, right? And I have to say, I think there's a lot of like people bragging about how hard they work. And if they're working that hard, I kind of feel like either they're lying about it or they're doing it wrong. Like my father-in-law is an entrepreneur in Japan, and he told me a long time ago that he works 2 hours a day. And he says, if you're the CEO and you're working more than 2 hours a day, you're not doing it right. And because the point is, like, you should have people doing the stuff for you, right? And I think one of the great things about multifamily is that you can build a team on a property, right? So there's work that's involved in like finding the properties and then actually closing the deal, right? But even then, second, third time around a closing, that starts to sort of run itself because you've been through the drill a few times, and now you realize that it's you're just, as long as you put the right people in the right places, it's going to get done, right? And so what I love about multifamily real estate is how time leveraged it is. Like once you buy the property, there is not a whole lot that you have to be doing, right? You obviously got to be keeping tabs on it. You got to be making sure that the people who you put on the property to manage it are doing the job right. But that doesn't mean you're like 24 hours a day, you're sitting on top of them, you know, bothering them. And, like if you did that, you'd probably run the property into the ground. You have to let people do their jobs. But what I love about it is just the ability to create a good life for yourself without making yourself crazy and giving yourself a lot of flexibility to control your time. As a matter of fact, the other day, I was telling you in the pre-call that we just bought this house in upstate New York, and basically, with coronavirus and everything, and the kids being in blended school or being quarantined or whatever, we just head up there sort of whenever we want to. And we were up there the other day, and I felt the need to tell my daughter, because I had never told her this before, and she's 11. And I'd said, what I do with my life is not that usual. I want you to understand, like, this is not, if you just go to work for somebody, this is not the life that you're going to have, right? You can't just take off whenever you want to, work from wherever you want, not work that day if you don't feel like it. Like, that's not going to happen if you get a job. So I want you to understand, this is not usual. And I know your friends' parents don't do this because they all have a job somewhere. So I want you to be thinking about that, is what I told her. But that's what I love about this lifestyle, is it does give you that freedom. And it also, like, if you're motivated by money, it can give you the opportunity to make enormous wealth too, and not just have the time freedom. So, but you asked me a different question, which was about,
but I love that. But I love the answer to that, though, because goes back to the purpose, and even that story with your daughter, I think, is very helpful, because we have to be very conscious of not just the decisions we make for ourselves, but the legacy we're trying to create for our children. And most people want their kids to have a better life and to have opportunities and things like that. But what example are we setting? What are we really teaching them? What are we really educating and showing them? And for me and for you, I'm sure as well, it's not that we love real estate because it's just super sexy. We love dealing with tenants and bricks and toilets and all that kind of stuff. It is the time leverage. It's the ability to sit here and record as my son's in the other room, doing his remote classes. And when he's done, we'll probably go outside and play in the snow. So it's that, right? And just the ability to do that versus, working a 40, 50, 60 hour a job, a week job, and being in the office. And I used to have that too, coming home late, and, everyone's already had dinner by the time I get home, and I got to spend 30 minutes with them before I have to go back to work, that evening in front of the computer. So, it's just the understanding, we a lot of times get in our own way, and we make up excuses of why we can't have things. And maybe it is the golden handcuffs, but you don't necessarily need to stick to that 6-figure salary if that's where you're at. You just need to figure out what your break even is to take care of your family, and then find that happiness, because no one's going to care when you're 65, 70, 75 years old and you put 30, 40 years into the company. They're not going to care, So take care of yourself and find happiness, however that manifests itself for you.
Yeah. And I one of the things that somebody once said, which really resonated with me, is that, nobody on their deathbed has ever said, I wish I spent more time in the office. Like, that's my great regret. I wish I had spent more time on my job. That's, so look, life is short, and, what's important is the people in your life. And if you can figure out a way to spend more time with them, the better. And especially if you have children, look, it happens so fast. They're out, they're on their own, and your time with them is short. So, do what you can to spend more time with them. But so we got sidetracked. You did ask me a question. Ask me the question again. Yes.
I want to hear about Two Bridges. So tell me about Two Bridges. How did you launch the company, and what are you all working on right now?
Yeah. So Two Bridges is a syndication business, like probably a lot of your guests on the show have. We started in 2013 after my previous partnership. When we decided to break that up, I launched this business focusing on buying assets in the Carolinas. Was was very fortunate because I got into the Carolinas market when it was still pretty much under the radar. Everybody was really focused on Texas, and I always like to avoid stuff that's hot. People tell me it's hot. I'm like, okay, you can have it. I'll go somewhere else. So but was attracted to the demographics of the Carolinas. It took me a while to break through, but when I finally did, I did a bunch of deals in rapid succession, built up to 400 units, all on a syndication basis, all focused in what's called the upstate of South Carolina, which is basically that corridor. It's like the manufacturing belt of South Carolina. It runs along the I-85 corridor between Charlotte and Atlanta. And it's a great market. And, I bought a bunch of assets fast and then started finding around 2015 that prices were really starting to get very frothy, even back then. And a lot of other people were starting to discover this market, probably having been through the same thought process as me, where they looked at other markets that were very hot, felt it was too frothy, and then said, "Hey, gosh, look at the growth in the Carolinas and look at the better cap rates there." So they started flooding into those markets as well and driving up the prices. It became really a lot harder to find deals, and I started experiencing things like, finding these off-market deals and then putting in an offer and kind of like stretching on the offer and feeling like, oh gosh, I think that might have been, it's more than I really want to pay. And then the seller coming back and saying that's 20% less than what I want. It's just, it got to start being crazy 2015, 2016. And I really started to kind of pull back and sit on the sidelines at that point, waiting for a correction to occur, which I thought was probably imminent. So it turned out to be wrong. Obviously, with that, didn't expect interest rates to continue to drop and drop and drop and drive the market even higher. But we wound up selling all those assets last year and making quite a good return for our investors with it, since our timing was really good, getting in and getting out. And since then, I've really been focusing on building my investor base for future deals. I've helped some other people out on their deals, probably looking for more opportunities to do that if they're operators that I trust. And also starting to kind of dip my toe back in with a little bit of a different focus than before. Like back when I started out, it was really possible to find deals that were just kind of undermanaged, right? You didn't really have to do a lot to the property other than just manage it better, maybe spruce it up a little bit, but you weren't talking about like huge value add, we weren't investing millions of dollars to like change the profile of the asset. It was really just like doing a little TLC and managing it better, and, bring in professional management, replacing a mom and pop, that kind of stuff. Those opportunities really kind of, they're gone. And, we went through the whole value add phase. Now I think if you're really looking for deals that have some meat on the bones, and this is what I'm starting to look at now, is really things that are more distressed, like deals that have just, they've fallen apart for whatever reason, or frankly, I mean, not to throw colleagues under the bus, but I think that there are beginning to be opportunities where new syndicators who really didn't know what they were doing bought at the top of the market and quickly got in trouble. And I'm starting to see some deals like that come on where just people have just bit off more than they could chew and are looking to get out. And those deals may, they've mismanaged them into being unfinanceable. So it's very hard to sell. So those kinds of deals I think are out there. I think frankly, as we get, unless a vaccine, I know there's good news about a vaccine, but it's still going to take a while to roll out. I think there's going to be some distress that's generated from, some people the vaccine won't come in time to save them. So I think that there's going to be some opportunities coming up, and that's what I'm trying to kind of get myself ready for and then looking at now.
Yeah, Jonathan, let's dig into that a little bit more, right? So when you talk about the markets and you got in at a great time, right? I mean, I started investing in 2011 or 2012 and, kind of that same thing where you get in, you can find a good deal The next year is a little bit harder to find a good deal. The next year is a little bit harder to find a deal. And then it just keeps getting harder and harder. You keep expanding your criteria, your markets and things like that. And you kind of basically said around 2015, 2016, hey, let's pause. We're not finding things that we like. Let's just kind of pause and see what happens with the market. You sell your assets in 2019. Now you're looking to get back in. You mentioned the newer investors, right? Certainly a lot of newer operators coming in, doing deals, maybe not taking the right approach. Let's just start there. What is the number one mistake that you think a lot of these newer operators are making where they're getting themselves really in over their heads with these deals they're doing?
I think it's hard to identify sort of one mistake, but I think if you want to look at it on a little bit of like a meta level, it's a mindset mistake. And the mindset mistake is, I've got to get a deal, and as long as I get a deal, everything will be fine. And so that kind of generates this get a deal at any cost mentality. And I think what happens then is, and I think that is a product itself of people who are unfamiliar with the business thinking it's easy, people who have never seen anything but a run up in prices thinking that that's going to continue forever, and people overpaying and leaving themselves no room for error because they've overpaid. So all those things I think contribute to kind of a precarious situation for some new syndicators and new owners. And I think real estate in general as a business, I think it's very populated by optimists, and it tends to feed on itself a little bit. And I think it's worse now with social media and all of the podcasts and all of the Facebook groups and all of the everything, because there's this constant drumbeat of like, hey, I got a deal, look at me. Hey, I got a deal, look at me. Hey, I just closed a 400 unit. It's like, someone who just started 2 weeks ago is now closing a 400 unit deal, right? And money is very easy to raise right now. And it's easy, relatively speaking, right? It's always hard to raise money, but it's much easier than it has been at other times in the past because there's so much attention being paid to this business. And I think what that means is that people are less cautious, and they're not really doing their underwriting well. They're not really doing their due diligence well. They're looking to make deals work. They're looking to explain away bad facts, and that leaves them almost no room for operational error at all. And I can say, like, one of the reasons I sold my assets last year was because I was looking at the operations of those deals, and we had a couple of properties where we just had problems collecting rent, and we just really couldn't figure out, like, why are we not collecting rent, right? Like, and I think that goes to some deeper issues of like Americans' ability, like where their financial wherewithal is. But this was in 2019. This was like at the top of what was supposed to be the best economy that humanity had ever known, right? If you believe the hype. And people, we were having trouble collecting rent. And I was looking at that going, well, if we're having trouble collecting rent now, what happens if we have a recession, right? Because these were like C properties. This is the tenant base that's going to get whacked the hardest in a recession. Like, all hell's going to break loose. I want this to be somebody else's problem when a recession happens. And now's a great time to sell because people are overpaying for stuff. I think the people who were buying at that time were buying into the idea that multifamily is always safe. Doesn't matter what the economy is. People always need a place to live, blah, 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 all the stuff that you hear from the gurus out there. And they drank the Kool-Aid. So there's very little room for error when you buy things that are priced for perfection. And, I bought things low and we still had issues with it. So I think that's just a big problem. If you overpay, you just set yourself up for real pain if anything goes wrong.
Yeah, that margin of error is very slim, right? I mean, if you don't buy it right, you've got to execute perfectly, and that just gets harder, especially if you don't have that long track record. And I will tell you, I mean, out of all the deals we've done, the ones where even the ones that have been a challenge because of the way we bought them, we're still fine and still in a pretty good spot. And I think it's just really important to focus on cash flow. I know a lot of folks think about value add and they focus on what they can create, and I that's the model. So you have to approach it that way. But I also think you have to look at the downside. People, like you said, a lot of investors are optimists, so they only focus on the upside, what we can create. But what about the downside? What happens if, rents do, fall down a little bit, or those future rents don't go up quite as high as you'd like? So you want to make sure you have that downside protection as well, so you're still comfortable with the deal, even if you miss the mark a little bit. Because if not, you're going to be in a very thin deal, and it's the stress is going to be tough there. Not to be a complete negative Nancy on this, but just to try to get a sense for those folks who are looking to continue to do deals in the current climate. You started talking about maybe distressed. What are some other things that you would recommend if you are going to move forward that we should be doing or looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to be, just as you alluded to right now, you really can't, in this market, in this environment, be focused on your upside, and get bright-eyed about like how much money you're going to make and start spending that money in your mind. You really have to be thinking about it in terms of what is a safe thing to do with this money. And especially if you are a syndicator, and frankly, I see too many syndicators out there who pretty much treat their investors as a means to an end. Like their investors are the way that they're going to get rich. My approach, look, this is like a sacred trust. If someone's giving me their money, right? Like it's their, like they deserve, first of all, they deserve the lion's share of the return. If I can't pay them, I'm not paying myself, right? And my biggest obligation is not to lose their money, right? Above everything else is not to lose their money. And if you're not approaching syndication with that in mind, you have no business being a syndicator. And if you're an LP and you invest with someone like that, like shame on you. Like you should find out what their attitude is before you invest with them. If they don't think that it's a sacred trust to have your money, then you should like stay away from them. If it's
Jonathan,
all about,
I'm sorry. That's such a great point. I want to ask deeper, like, how would an LP find that out? Because I mean, everyone's going to say that, right? Like, very few people are going to say, "Oh no, my stuff is more important than yours." How would an LP ask the right question or determine if that syndicator or operator has their best interest in mind?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question because I think it's tough. I think you have to get to know them well. You have to talk to other people who have invested with them. You should go in, preferably with like a recommendation from someone else. Like find out, talk to your friends, who have they invested with, who has done well, who has the right attitude, and just invest with those people. Just don't. I mean, I'm saying this against my own interest in a sense. Lots of people have found me and decided to become investors because they heard me, they saw me on Facebook, or they saw a podcast interview. And I'm grateful that those people have trusted me enough to come to me. But honestly, it's not the best way to find somebody to invest with, right? Based on like, oh, you saw an interview with them and you liked what they said. It's better to go and like talk to your other people who are LPs and say, who is like the most trustworthy syndicator in the business? Like, who do you feel safe? Who would you invest your kids' college money with? Ask those kinds of questions. And then, ask them, somebody asked me a good question the other day, which I think gets at this. They said, what, first of all, have you ever lost any investor money, right? Have you ever made capital calls? And what happens when you don't, when you're not making money? Like if the syndicator is saying like, oh, I'm paying myself an asset management fee no matter what, because I'm entitled because I'm running the property, maybe you should think twice. My attitude is if I can't pay the preferred return that I've, promised that I would pay, I'm not paying myself anything until I can catch up to that preferred return, because it's just not right. So, but I want to go into the deals in the first place thinking like, you can never be sure about anything, but I'm feeling pretty damn confident that my investors' money is safe in this deal. And that's how I'm looking at things now. So like I was recently involved in a deal on a fund of funds basis. So, raising a fund to invest in somebody else's deal. The only reason I got involved in that deal was because I know the operator really well. I know their attitude. I've spent lots of time over the last couple of years talking with them about their attitude. So I felt safe entrusting my investors' money to them. And the second thing was that the asset and the market were both really well positioned to ride out what's happening right now. And it's a deal in Atlanta, and I just saw a stat published today by who was it? Whether it's keeping me anyway. One of the big information aggregators, and talk that this is a deal in Atlanta. Atlanta's has had one of the lowest. How to express this? With the unemployment that's related to COVID, Atlanta is at the very bottom of like sufferers of this. Like their unemployment rate has changed relatively little. So compared to say New York, which has a 12% increase in unemployment, Atlanta has a 4% or 4.5% increase in unemployment. So it's been really resilient during this COVID episode because it's not dependent on tourism. It's not dependent on entertainment, things like that are really hurting right now. It's like some of the markets you mentioned to me that are just they have their own reason for being, and it's not so dependent on people coming from outside and traveling there. So because of those things, I felt it was okay to get into this deal. Again, approaching it from the perspective not of, hey, is this deal going to return 2x of my money, but hey, am I going to get out with 1x of my money? Like, am I going to get out with my money when this is all said and done? And I think that's the way you have to be looking at deals right now. Now, again, that shouldn't make you overpay. Like, you shouldn't adjust your, like it's very easy to overpay for a deal if you're only looking at like, will I survive, right? And then ironically, you won't survive if you're going to overpay that much. But you still have to have that. The return is like your margin of safety, right? That's how you have to think about it. So you still need to have the return there, but it has to be a return that's generated relatively low risk right now. So the return can't be generated based on doing a huge value add, right? It's really got to be generated on either solid cash flow because the asset is a solid asset in a solid market. And I would tend towards B right now because of the tenant profile and the lack of new build competition, although B is not a fail-safe by any stretch. And everybody's also thinking the same thing, so they're driving up the price, but relatively safe. The other thing is real heavy lift stuff, like really hairy deals that make sense no matter what the market is. Deals that have fallen apart, deals that are half occupied, whatever it is, where that all you have to do is just set the ship in the right direction again, and you'll make money. Those kinds of deals you should do no matter what the market looks like, but they're hard to find, and they take some expertise to pull off. But those are the things that I think are worth pursuing.
Great advice right there. First and foremost, focus on the return of capital. I think that a lot of times we look at return on capital, looking at a 15, 16, 18% IRR, getting excited. But before you jump to, that number, focus on, will I be able to get my money back? How secure is this deal? What's going on with the market? What's the business plan? All of those things, and use that to decide whether or not you want to move forward with a deal. And then you can look at the upside potential of, okay, hey, I may double my money or whatever the case may be. And then the other point is, focusing on more Class B right now, simply because, the C class is going to get hit the hardest when it comes to being able to pay rent and make money there. A class is going to compete with new construction. And right now we're seeing a lot of markets with their A class developments giving big concessions and, things of that nature. So there's a lot of competition there, and that's going to roll down if you're competing for the same renter versus that Class B, it's not exactly in that same realm. So you got a little bit of a sweet spot there. The last thing you mentioned was looking for those distressed opportunities. No matter what market you're in, a distressed opportunity. You can't, you're not going to go get that agency debt with 5 years IO and, all those beautiful things. You're going to have to go in with a hairy deal. You're going to have to do a lot of work and roll your sleeves up. And, the risk is in the ability to actually, turn that thing around and get it stabilized. But if you can do that, there's a great upside potential there. I want to ask a couple more things before we go into our bullseye round. Just real quick, I know that you are working with other students as well, just teaching them about real estate investing, syndication. And I know you pretty well through just your Facebook group. I mean, that's where I came across you in the first place. Can you just talk a little bit about, the Facebook group as well as what you're doing from a coaching standpoint?
Sure. So the Facebook group is called Multifamily Investment Community. We're almost at 11,000 members at this point. I started it a few years ago because I just felt that there wasn't a good place online for people to have good discussions about multifamily. There weren't really a lot of Facebook groups at the time about multifamily. There are a bunch now, some other good ones. But at the time, Bigger Pockets was really focused more on single family. I didn't feel the multifamily discussion was it was hard to. There were good discussions going on there, but they're just very hard to find, and they got lost in all of the single family stuff. So I started the group to have a purely multifamily forum, and wanted it to be spam free, promotion free, just focused on the education and just answering people's questions when they had them. So because of that, we grew pretty fast, like I said, and it's still a great resource for people if you want to come and join and get to know some other folks in the business, and just have a place where you can just ask questions and get good answers to your questions about multifamily investing. It's the place to go. In terms of the paid coaching I do, I run a group called Multifamily Launchpad, and that is it's a little bit different take on this kind of real estate mentoring business. It's not. I don't do the $30,000 individual coaching thing. I wanted to again set up a site that was easily accessible and really high quality. And I run it on a membership basis, which means, you can join for a month, you can join for 2 years, you can join for 10 years, however long you want. As soon as you get tired of it, you can leave. And it's, low risk to join. And we just do coaching on a group basis. So I have a private Facebook group where students can ask questions. I have a very extensive course inside to answer all, so you can go without having to ask me the same questions over and over and over again. You can go through the program, and then you can then ask me questions inside the Facebook group and on our monthly calls and on our quarterly mastermind days. So that's actually it's currently closed to new members. It'll open up again next year, i.e. 2021. It's a great way to get a little more high touch than just the free Facebook group, and go more in depth and have a little more hand-holding at a what I think is a pretty reasonable price compared to a lot of other stuff that's out there.
Yeah, Jonathan, thank you for sharing that. For our listeners, if you want to check that out, this Multifamily Investment Community Facebook group, you can check that out. Just Google it. We'll also make sure we put that in the show notes so you can check that out. And like Jonathan said, it's a great platform, a lot of great connections with people, no promotion, no spam, nobody telling you they got some wholesale deal that they don't really have. So it's really just about, multifamily investing, learning, the ins and outs, and trying to connect with others and pushing yourself forward. Jonathan, we're going to go to our bullseye round. Are you ready?
All right, sure. I'll try to keep up.
Give me a failure or an apparent failure that set you up for later success.
Well, yeah, you have to say my first syndication deal that I did, I made a lot of mistakes on that deal. I from underwriting mistakes to hiring the wrong people to run it at first, really everything you can think about, being overly optimistic, thinking it was too easy, and even, sort of celebrating too soon after I bought it. And that property just became such a nightmare. It was everything from, just managers just not knowing what they were doing. And, it was a market where we had 96% occupancy, and they managed to drive the occupancy down to like 85%. We had mold breakouts. We had water mains breaking every month. It was at the point where even after hiring my new management company, which was very good, every time my manager's name showed up on a caller ID, I was like, oh God, I don't want to talk, what is it now? And we had 2 major fires in the space of a month on that property. Everything you can imagine went wrong. But I learned so much more from doing that deal than I would have if I had, if all my deals were like my best deal, right? If all my deals were like my best deal, I would have been sitting here thinking like look how smart I am. I'm the greatest investor ever. And this is all so easy. It's the hard ones that teach you the important lessons. And I have to say, I'm just better at everything as a result of having that mistake and having it early, rather than having it later. So it was a blessing in disguise. And then, because the market cooperated with me, I sold it at a big profit and everybody was happy at the end of the day. So it worked out fine, but it easily could have gone the other way.
It all works out in the end. That's one of the beauties of multifamily is if you buy right, those mistakes can all be forgiven as long as you can get it stabilized over time and get it to that point. But if you buy it right.
Yeah, buying it right though, this is the thing that I think people have to understand. Buying it right has a lot to do with when you buy it. And maybe it has to all do with when you buy it. And if you buy it at the top of the market and you overpay to get the deal, then it doesn't all work out in the end, because you may have a couple of when you're buying at a 5 cap for a stabilized property, or that's like a C deal, right? And you go down a couple of points in collections, you're already in cash management with your lender, and a couple of points beyond that, and you're actually not even making your debt service. So it doesn't all necessarily work out in the end. You really have to be careful. So that's, I want to just emphasize that, caution people, this is not easy. This is not free money. This is not passive. This involves some real, thinking and execution.
Yeah, good point. Thanks for clarifying that. Next question. Give me a digital or mobile resource you recommend for your business.
In terms of something operationally I use in the business, or
either operational or maybe with your investors or anything to kind of just track relationships, things like that?
Well, I would actually, I use, the thing that comes to mind right now, other than sort of Facebook, which I think is a great resource for connecting with people, is Convertkit. I don't know if you're familiar with Convertkit, but it's an email software, which just makes, sending out your marketing emails and really all kinds of emails. For communicating with my group members, for communicating with my larger email list, for communicating with my investors, it's all great. It's all one platform. You can slice and dice your list any way you want to. It's not so good for integrating with, say, like an investor portal or things like that. But in terms of if you're building a list of investors and you're building, you want to have a newsletter list, or you want to have something like that, it's a good tool for that. It's just very easy to use.
Give me the book you've recommended or gifted the most in the last year.
Well, I would say the one that I kind of come back to every time I'm asked this question is a book called The War of Art. Right? It's a play on the art of war. It's by Stephen Pressfield, and it's really aimed at writers, but it's good for entrepreneurs in general. And the basic premise of The War of Art is that it is tough to sit down every day and just do the work you need to do. And it's all about focus and just getting done what you need to get done, even when you don't feel like it. So I think it's a really, really, really helpful book for entrepreneurs.
Speaking of getting things done, give me a daily habit that helps you stay focused on your goals.
So I have a sort of a planning system that is from a group called the 90-Day Year. There's a guy named Todd Herman who runs that program, and that has been very, very helpful for me in keeping track of my tasks and making sure they get done. And what I find most helpful about that program is actually not just that you're getting stuff done, but that it built into that plan. And it's like a journal that's for 90 days. I buy a new one every 90 days. But it's built into it is reflecting on what you've accomplished. So it's not just that you got stuff done and now it's out of mind. Like you actually go back and like review and like, oh, hey, wow, I got a lot of stuff done. It's really, encouraging. So part of it is to build that mindset of savoring your wins so you have energy to go forward.
What's one thing you know now that you wish you knew when you were starting out?
Well, I wish that I knew more about how to build an audience and raise money. Because I really did believe that nonsense about if you find a great deal, the money will find you, just isn't true. If you've taken the time to build the audience first, it'll happen. But it doesn't just magically happen out of thin air. And I believe that, and got hurt a couple of times believing that. So that's one thing I wish I knew when I started out. And also the other thing is the importance of marketing, just in general. Even though you're in a real estate business, like if you're in business, you're in the business of marketing. You have to market yourself or you're just not going to succeed. So the importance of marketing is something else that I really understand now.
All right. I know you are in the New York area. I'll let you clarify exactly where you're at, and you'll get to pick your options here. But give me the best place to grab a bite to eat.
Oh, gosh. In the New York area?
Wherever home is.
Wherever home is, yeah. So I'm in Brooklyn, New York. Gosh, the best place to grab a bite to eat in Brooklyn. There's so many choices, but I'll tell you like a real secret, deep Brooklyn place. There's a place way up at Coney Island called L&B Spumoni Gardens, where they make the best Sicilian pizza in the world. And they serve so much of it that if you order a Sicilian pie, it's out in 5 minutes because they're just making sheet after sheet after sheet after sheet of the stuff because they've got a line out the door. But if you're ever in Brooklyn and you can make it out to L&B Spumoni Gardens,
all right,
it's worth your while.
That sounds like a place to check out for sure. Jonathan, I really enjoyed our conversation, man. It's always great to hear different views and opinions, and love just listening to the practical feedback you've given as far as what to look for in the market, how to protect yourself in deals, where there's some opportunities today, and just really thinking about, one, preserving capital first and foremost when you're looking at deals, preserve the capital, and then focus on how you can actually grow it. We mentioned your Facebook group, the Multifamily Investment Community, which we will link to. How else can investors get in touch or listeners get in touch if they want to learn more about you?
Yeah, so if you're interested in investing with me, go to Two Bridges Management. The actual URL is Two Bridges spelled out and then mgmt.com. But if you Google Two Bridges Asset Management, you'll find us very easily. So go there to fill out the investor inquiry. And if you are interested in Multifamily Launchpad, that is multifamilylaunchpad.org. If you go there, there's a free download, which you can grab, and it'll put you on my mailing list. And then you'll know the next time the program opens to new members.
Jonathan, thank you for coming on Target Market Insights. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
It's great to talk to you, John. Thanks for setting this up.